has the debate in the country and in Parliament been conducted in a way which will enable our society to adapt wisely to a fundamental social change? Is this innovation likely to create, at a time of extreme social pressure, a more cohesive, settled and unified society? And lastly, my Lords, is it appropriate at this stage to frustrate the clear will of the Commons on this bill? I have concluded that the answer to all these questions must be no. And therefore, my Lords, if it is the unusual intention of this House to divide on second reading, I shall have no alternative but to abstain.
My Lords, I will come back to the speech of the Right Reverend Prelate at the end of my remarks. I have had, like all of us, a very large amount of correspondence on this, much of it by email, and thanks to the Whip's recess, I've been able to reply to a great many of them. Not all, but most. And I start with my own starting point is something which I learnt many years ago as an undergraduate, faced with what was for me a new involvement with people who were not heterosexual. And I asked my grandfather, who was an extremely wise lecturer at the Edinburgh School of Medicine, what about it? And he said, "My dear boy, it is as foolish to condemn those who have homosexual proclivities as it is to condemn them for having red hair." And I have lived with that all my life. And I've always been against discrimination against homosexuals. My Lords, in the exchanges I've had through emails and others, I've identified three clear lines of argument against the bill. The first I can deal with very briefly. There has been reference to homophobia. I'm afraid some of the messages that I've had actually reek of homophobia. And I was reminded of some of the arguments when the Parliament abolished the criminal liability for homosexual conduct between adults. The same dreadful arguments, deeply shaming, and I'm very sorry that they still exist. However, the second argument is one which has been referred to several times in this debate so far. The question is, does the bill redefine marriage? It was put to me by one correspondent, the government's plans will redefine the marriages of the 24 million married people without their consent. My Lords, other people have referred to their anniversaries. Last year, my wife and I celebrated our diamond wedding. I have to say, mutual comfort and support. My Lords, is this bill going to redefine that marriage? I have to say, I simply cannot see how that could possibly happen. And I was grateful for my noble friend on the front bench confirmed that there is nothing, my Lords, nothing in this bill which will redefine our marriage, or indeed of the other 24 million married people in this country. And I think one's got to regard that argument as really quite misconceived. And as others have said, it's not irrelevant that there is a great deal more support for the bill among young people who are either facing marriage or about to get married or hope to get married than there is among the population generally. But they don't see it like that. My Lords, you've only got to put the question. The young man poses the question to his intended, will you marry me? And she says, oh, no, this bill has made it all totally different. It's for gays and lesbians. I can't possibly marry you. Well, I mean, my Lords, it's pure fantasy. And I don't think we should pay too much attention to that. The other argument, which I have been rather more impressed by, is the one, again, which has been mentioned, is the question of the potential liability and difficulties of people who, particularly in the public service, who find themselves, in a sense, implementing the provisions of the bill in one way or another. And a number of people, including some of those who have expressed support for the bill, have voiced these concerns to me. And I think this is something which this House will need to look at quite carefully. And I was very much comforted that my noble friend on the front bench gave us the assurance that ministers are considering what more might be done to allay these anxieties. And I would regard that as very important indeed. And finally, I return to the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Leicester. I hope he will not feel it unfair if I call him my old friend, as indeed he is. I have come to the firm conclusion that there is nothing to fear in gay marriage, and indeed it will be a positive good, not just for same-gender unions, but for the institution of marriage generally. The effect will be to put right at the center of marriage the concept of a stable, loving relationship. As a practicing Christian, could I make this point to the Bishop's bench, including the Most Reverend Prelate? There is every reason why, in time, the Anglican Church should come to accept that, though I recognize it may take some time. The character of love which marriage reflects, faithful, stable, tough, unselfish, unconditional, is the same character that most Christians see in the love of God. Marriage is therefore holy, not because it is ordained by God, but because it reflects that most important central truth of our religion, the love of God for all of us.
My Lords, some who tend to label anyone who opposes this bill as part of a group of homosexual bigots. Once that is said, the argument has stopped. As a Labour peer, I wholly dismiss that. I find it insulting. And I note, for example, that some key elements of the homosexual lobby, including Stonewall, have only come in the fairly recent past to support same-sex marriage. For me, there is a clear distinction between anti-discrimination